Alam ng puso, sa dibdib ko'y buhay, hindi sumusuko sa hirap matlumbay, sa mga manlulupi hindi pasisi, duyan ang magigiti, hindi papi. Kabuti ay batid, 500 taon ng daluyot yanig, tayo bumabangon, isang puso pa rin, isang alab sa dilim, iba't iba sa putik, matapos ang bagyo, lahat magkakapit-bisig, patuloy na sumusulong, isang puso pa rin, isang iba man ang mga bituin, sa isang kalawakan magniningning, magkahawak kamay sa lilim ng bugaw na langit. Ang magpabiling, dili magpapildi, dungganing awiton, dili mapahilom. Umaga pabiling, dili magpapildi, dungganing awiton, dili mapahilom. Umaga pabiling, dili magpapildi, dungganing awiton, dili mapahilom. Umaga pabiling, dili magpapildi, dungganing awiton, dili mapahilom. Isang puso pa rin, isang alam sa dilim, iba't iba man ang mga bituin, sa isang kalawakan magniningning, magkahawak kamay sa lilim ng bugaw ng langit, umaawit, umaawit. Alam ng puso,
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuhu. I am Rohani M. Derugungan from MSU Iligan Institute of Technology, a member of the Philippine Historical Association. I will be your moderator for this afternoon panel session 1 and 2 on maritime trade in Southeast Asia. Session 1 will be from 1:30 to 2:30 and session 2 at 2:30 to 3:30. Each panel has 2 presenters and each speaker will have 20 minutes to present. Participants are given the chance to ask in the open forum after the presentations. You may either make use of the Q&A box, the chat box, or raise hand. Just press the corresponding button. Okay, so we shall now begin with session 1. Our first speaker is from South China University of Technology, Ghuangzhou PRC, also an affiliate of Zhejiang Hexen Group. He will deliver to us his paper entitled The Science of Sea Voyages in Southeast Asia, Environment and Society. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Christopher Leslie. Take it, Dr. Leslie.
Okay, hi everybody, thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, I think that should be it. Am I on? Okay, so I hope you can hear me. If not, please send me a message. I think, here's my control screen. Yeah, I think everything is okay. So if you have any problems hearing me, please feel free to interrupt or even ask questions during the Q&A, and I'll be happy to fill in any of the gaps from this presentation. So I'm interested in the history of racism and the way in which these sea voyages and the records of the sea voyages can be an opportunity to think about the history of racism in a different way and maybe provide a better kind of thinking. The idea of racism, to me, I think is something that is developed during the Enlightenment. And before the Enlightenment, we had this idea of humanity as being one species that sort of changes gradually as you go across the world. After the Enlightenment, we start to see the increasing idea that there are they're not one species, but 4 or 5 human species, each of them with different characteristics. And this idea of the racism sort of develops in the 19th century alongside of colonialism, and is sort of very prominent in some of the famous racist texts of the 19th century, Morton's Types of Mankind or Lewis Henry Morgan's Ancient Society. And so my goal in this presentation and the goal in this research project is to look at this transformation, and I'm guided by Dorothy Roberts' sort of idea in her book, Fatal Invention. She wants to counter the idea that race was a scientific concept that was later politicized. And in fact, she wants to say that the race concept was invented to promote political and economic gains. And the fact that we sort of get rid of the biological basis of race does not mean that racism doesn't exist. In fact, it makes racism even more unacceptable. And in order to sort of engage in this project, I've been interested in looking at these sea voyages. And for this presentation, I'm focusing on ones that relate to Southeast Asia. And you would think that the sea voyages of the 17th century would be different from the ones of the 18th and 19th century. because the modern concept of race is invented between, during the period of the Enlightenment, right? So the end of the 17th and the 18th centuries. But the story is not the one that I expected, and I think it's something that goes counter to a lot of ideas. The voyagers and the trading companies that were engaged in travel were the ones who provided the data for thinking about race. However, it doesn't seem like they fit in with the Enlightenment philosophers and the Enlightenment politicians. And perhaps it's something as just as simple as if you are a sailor or a merchant, you sort of respect the people that you were going to engage with in a way that maybe somebody back in Europe doesn't find appropriate. And so the merchants and the travelers are not necessarily, egalitarian. They're not necessarily kind, but they don't hold the same sort of racial ideologies that we see from writers and philosophers in Europe in the 19th century. And so this sort of interest to me, this is sort of interesting to me because it goes counter to some of the ideas. One of the curious things is that the Chinese traders were everywhere in these texts, and the idea that there were existing trade networks that could be exploited is very much on the front page of these texts. The idea that there was a potential for revenue and a potential for sort of increased commerce was the key goal here. And as several presenters have already said, we can see in these texts that Southeast Asia has an important part in human history. This sort of middle ground of trade also confused naturalists. They weren't sure if where Southeast Asia people fit in their racial categories. And we get a chance to sort of take a new look. So I have a lot more presentation here than I have time. I'm looking forward to finishing up the written paper. But just to quickly give a couple of highlights to what I've been looking at. You probably know Antonio de Morga, the Spanish colonial official who wrote the 1609 book, The Philippine Islands. And his text is really interesting to me, partly because of his justifications of the Spanish effort to create a sort of what they thought of as a more productive society, but also the way in which they sort of rationalized their rule against what they thought was the capricious local leaders who had failed to provide sort of these ideals of good governance. He's very interesting to me in the way that he says that the local people need to get rid of all of their traditions except one. And he says that it's to the benefit of everybody that they maintain slavery. And the idea that there's a huge economic investment is something that is kind of a strange sort of rationalization to me. And he speaks very kindly about the missionaries who are organizing the young boys into singers, groups of singers and dancers, and the idea that the religion can play an important role, the Christian religion can play an important role in the development of this economy is a big part of his text. The potential for directly or more directly engaging with Chinese merchants is also part of his text. I was amazed by this very long paragraph of different kinds of things, which means that you can get silk and you can get fabric and you can get carpets and you can get metalwork. You can get lots of different kinds of food. And as we heard before lunch, this sort of trade in food and this excitement about food is something that's motivating the gathering this sort of power in the 17th century Southeast Asia. Another figure that I've been looking at is Joris van Spielbergen. He is the second Dutch person to circumnavigate the globe, and he is the first one to do an official expedition of the Dutch East India Company. And his book was published in 1619, The East and West Indian Mirror. It has some very beautiful maps that try to show to the readers the voyage. All throughout these texts, you see the little ships. That's his fleet, right? The little 6 ships going around the world, trying to show to the readers what the sailors were seeing. And although he's, convinced of his own superiority, he is not unfair in the way in which he describes the local people. He praises their ability to learn. He respects them because of the way in which they have engaged with in a Christian sort of mythology, and he appreciates their physical environment, their homes, and their governance. And this doesn't really sound like somebody who is trying to say that these people are a different race. They're people who have a different tradition, right? They're people who have different culture or different habits, I guess they would say at the time. And as they approach Manila, again, they notice the Chinese sailors, and they decide not to wait just because they have other more pressing things to do instead of engaging in trade with them. But they notice the Spanish officials taking tribute payments from the towns, and there are many people who are trying to engage in trade, and there's a great potential for trade. And so the political and economic system here is paramount to his writing. There's nothing that we can recognize as racialized, and this idea of gradations between populations is what we see most prominently. He also travels off to Indonesia, and he makes comments about the ways in which Christianity should be used to bind people together. And so by trying to get rid of the sort of military approach and having individuals settle in the Southeast Asia, who could then help support the spread of Christianity and bring people together, would be the best policy according to him. And I'm going to skip over Josiah Child for time and move into this, what I thought should be a transformation period, right? So from the late 17th century to the 18th century, we did see it as part of the European Enlightenment, this concept of race being used as something that specifically means a large group of humans that have similar characteristics. And the first person to really enunciate this kind of different thinking is Francois Bernier in 1684. His essay, A New Division of the Earth, says there are 4 or 5 races or species of human beings, and those differences can be used as a way of classifying the geography of the Earth. And Steve Sturman's essay here is a quite nice sort of summary of this kind of thinking, this new challenge for the word race. And our friend Linnaeus, who is the person who invents the idea of, or invents the system of biological classification that we see today, is somebody who thinks about where to classify humans, and we can credit him for putting humans as part of the animal kingdom, right? But he also is the one who starts to think about 4 races of humans, each having different characteristics. His 4 colors, right? The white race, the red race, the yellow race, and the black race are designed to sort of fit in with this pre-existing idea of the humors. And he extends this in his later text to make this classification of mammals. And Londa Schiebiger's book, Nature's Body, does a good job of telling us about that change. So I'm gonna leave it to you if you want to take a look at it. In the 1758 edition of his classification system, he comes up with a lot of the racial epithets that we think of today as being important. The European race being inventive and liking ceremony, right? So we can see in Europe people who can create new things and also who can use the ceremonies of government and of the judiciary to make a better world. The Asian race, inflexible, greedy, right? This trading race, right, which is somehow inferior, and then the African race that doesn't really have a lot of motivation and needs to be led by authority. And these sounds like a lot like modern racial stereotypes, and so we can sort of think about the way in which they have been articulated in the 18th century. And finally, around the time of the democratic revolutions in the US and France, we see Johann Blumenbach come up with this idea of the Caucasian race. And he says the most beautiful people are the ones that come from Mount Caucasus, and everybody else is sort of a degeneration of the races from there. And he calls the Asian race the Malay race, right? And thinking about this sort of group as one of the key races that sort of transition between the fallen races and the European civilization. And this is the firm foundation that we see for the 19th century. And definitely the word Caucasian is still used today, although most people have forgotten where it comes from. So when I first started this project, I believed, I expected to find that the naturalists, after the sort of invention of the race concept, would be more racist, right? That they would be looking for evidence and finding evidence to support these things, and they don't really do the work that you would expect them to do. So if you look at Thomas Forrest's book, The Voyage from Calcutta from 1792, he talks about the effects of religion and habit on the people's productivity. And although he's not kind about the local people, but he doesn't say it's something inherent in their biology, right? He says instead that it is just their habit that makes them less likely to do things. And he praises their ability to use tools and thinks that there's something possible here in terms of progress. He also talks about the different people of Indonesia or of Sumatra being sort of like on this gradation, right? Still fitting in with this old idea of one human race that has different variations, and talking about the way in which these different groups have interacted. And my thinking was maybe we need more time. So I went and looked at Andri Muho. He's the guy who supposedly discovered Angkor Wat, although of course it was never lost. But he is the one who is often mentioned as being one of the first Europeans to go to Angkor Wat. And he sees his book published after his death in 1864. And his thinking here is that, Angkor Wat, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, these are places of great potential that are not being used. This is Battambang, the capital of the province, an important trading city. He portrays it with water buffaloes and palm trees as if it is this wilderness that is waiting for somebody to come and make use of it. And he again talks about the influence of habit and government, and thinking about the ways in which a better government could have a very success here. He writes about it, writes about the king of Thailand in a positive way, in the sense that he brought in the printing press and can study astronomy, although he does maybe rely on some information or interpretation that's based on imitation. He does in general praise the Thai people, and thinks about the ways in which this very fertile land could be something that would be an opportunity to imagine something new with a new kind of government. And again, we see these ideas of local differences being the predominant way of thinking. He doesn't make generalizations between the different tribes, but says that different tribes have their own ways of working, and everybody is interested in Christianity and bringing these things together. And a very surprising comment at the end is it's possible that America is going to be engaged in a revolution, and the supply of cotton is going to be interrupted. And England would be, and Europe would be wise to exploit this area for raw materials so that people don't lose their work when they don't have enough cotton to make into cloth, right? And so the economic consideration here is most important. So I'm having a tough time finding the transformation in the racial thinking before and after this race concept, even though contemporary with Nugroho are these 19th century thinkers who say there are 4 categories of humans and each of them has a distinct biology. And so the question then becomes, what do we want to make of these mariners' stories? And the investigation of these sort of firsthand accounts counters the assumption of inevitable progress in the fight against racism. I think many times we say, we start off in a low sort of period of people are all racist, and then over time things get better, and they always just get better and we become less racist. And that doesn't really seem to be the case. We seem to be a place, maybe with hierarchy and, maybe sort of despicable notions, but not that these people were stuck in their biology. And it gets worse from there into the 19th century until maybe in the 1950s, we start to think about race in a different way. I don't want to over idealize, these people are definitely interested in exploitation. However, they offer little support for the polygenism that was proposed by the 19th century intellectuals. And in that way, they suggest that the racist theories that start sort of dominating global politics in the 19th century and find their height in the 20th century, those racial ideas were not inevitable. And they were definitely something that was created, like Dorothy Roberts says, for the purposes of exploitation. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions later.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Leslie. That was an eye-opener, having associated the related racism with maritime trade in Southeast Asia. Racism in the first place nowadays is very relevant. Thank you very much, sir. We now go to the second presenter. Our paper presenter is actually coming from the Universitas Airlangga, Surabaya City, Indonesia. Assalamualaikum. She will be presenting to us a paper entitled International Maritime Trading Network and its Islamization Process in Java in the 15th Century. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andri, Setyo, Nugroho, and Dita, Reista, Nurfaizah. Dita, Reista, you are the one presenting? Okay, so take it away, Dita. Dita, we can't hear you. Excuse me, Dita, we can't hear you. You might be. We can't hear you. Do you hear us? We cannot hear your presentation, Dita. Mom, something wrong with your... You please check the mute. You please check your mic, please. Also your headset. There has something to be... You must have probably missed a button that you have to put on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear now. Okay.
Sorry for a moment. So let me share the screen. Can you see? Can you see?
Yes. Go ahead. We can now see your screen as well as we can hear you.
Now, I will share with you our research on the title International Maritime Trading Network and Islamization process in Java in the 15th century. We have a big concept. We have three big concepts that we want to share with you. They are the oldest Islamic heritage in Java. Second is Islam and the establishment of a commercial city on the north coast of Java. And the last is the reform of Islam's further caravan in the 15th century. And from the advance this introduction, Java became a part of international trading network since 11th century. In this period, Java is not just a part, international part, but also as a competitive merchants and bring the traders come along with better from Western or Eastern of the world. And time to time until the 14th century, Java made trading that worked successfully as a commercial zone, either with the region East Nusantara or with the other countries, including Southeast Asia. The part pretty much located in the north coastal of Java is considering the stability of the wave of this oceanic and then exchange so many things and not just limited to economic side. As we know that Javanese people believe our north coastal has open character to others and they can observe, conquer, and acculturate whatever the merchants export and not just limited to economic side. There's also any others like political, cultural, especially in the language and religion. And this nice occasion, we had an interest how the religions of Islam, especially in Islam, how Islam can spread in Java during the 15th century. We choose the 15th century because this is a unique phenomenon. This occurred in what happened in the period in the history of Indonesia. We lacking on the written sources after the decline of Majapahit Empire, as we know, and so that's why we want to research. We want to explore what will happen, what the process exactly Islam can spread in Java at the time. So this is the goal, and we're going to the first main focus, the oldest Islamic heritage in Java. The first discovery that indicated as the oldest Islamic heritage in Java was a gravestone of Fatimah bin Maimun, located in Leran Gresik, East Java, and it written in 11th century. But this discovery is a question that needs to be answered. And there is any controversy when we judge the location around the gravestone. The condition around gravestone is a brackish water, and which is covered ground with mangroves always. And in the end, the controversy still. In the end, the controversy that it is impossible that any gravestone in that location is impossible because it is a brackish water. And then by the research of that bit careless and calculated. They said that this question actually was anchored by an anchor of merchant ship, which is docked at the port. This cruise ship actually is located in near north coast of Java, so that's why many merchant ships anchored and they anchor around there. And the next evidence of the oldest Islamic heritage can be found in Troloyo funeral complex. Troloyo is in near of Travolan, as a capital city of a Majapahit Empire, such as a Christian at the Princess Putri Champa Cemetery in the 14th century and Kubur Pitu with the period 13th and 15th century. Okay, this is a gravestone of Fatimah bin Maimun. This is from Leran, Gresik. Also, there are carving by calligraphy in Arabic. And then this is a gravestone of, sorry, that is some trouble. And then it's a gravestone of the one gravestone at the Princess James Cemetery. This is carving in Saka year, traditional calendar, that it means from this one and then this 2, this is 9 and then O. And then O. So this is carving said that 1290 Saka or equal to 3068 Ala Domini. And this is the oldest one at the cemetery, at the Princess Cham Cemetery. And this is the Kubur Pitu in Troloyo complex, in Troloyo Fundara complex. Kubur Pitu, it means a 7 gravestone. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. This is, and this is the structure of the gravestone. It's tombstone. And actually, the 6 of them, like this one in the middle, like a dome, like a cube, and then just one like this one. So it's a different. And it is a front view, and it is a back side. From this gravestone, actually, so carving by Arabic, and this is a Tawhid calligraphy in Islam, and carving. And this carving also look like not too perfect, and we assume that the crafter who make this gravestone was just convert to Islam. Yes, they still newbie, so they're not used to writing in Arabic well, and then so that's why the calligraphy look like not perfect. So this is to prove the existence of Islam at period. And the period of this Kubur Batu written in between 1790 Saka or equal to 1797 Domini. Kubur Batu written in between 1797 Saka, or it means 1475 Anno Domini, and 1390 Saka, or it means 1397 Anno Domini. And still carved in Saka year, same as like the tombstone in the Putri Champa Cemetery. And the people around, the local people also call this a Kubur Batu as a Kubur Pitu as a kuburan Serengingi, or it means on the sunlight of cemetery. The sunlight of cemetery. It based on this sun carving of the backside. This is a logo of a Majapahit Empire. So that's why the people call it as the sunlight of a cemetery. Based on this two, we can conclude that the Kubur Pitu, the owner of Kubur Pitu may we believe in that the owner of Kubur Pitu were the government official or even the relative of Majapahit Empire, but they are convert to Islam or region the Muslim. And next, we're going to the second focus about Islam and the establishment of a commercial city on north coastal of Java. And the connection with political economic activities, the Berantas and the Bangawan Solar River have an important meaning for Majapahit Empire because on these two rivers have functioned as a to connect their coastal region with the inside capital of Majapahit Empire. So that's why it had important meaning for that empire. Beside of them is Tuban. Tuban as an international port at one of the trade networks in Southeast Asia. Tuban also in East Java, near north coastal of Java, and beside Tuban, also any Kresik as a trading port, national trading port. Kresik in the time had two biggest port. They are port of Krisi, or right now is a Kresik, and part of Sedayu, but right now is Lamongan, but the Sedayu, it has become a part of other region already outside of Gresik. It located in Lamongan, but still in north coastal line. It's still in East Java, not too far. And Gresik provides an important clue about traders who come to the north coastal, coming from areas where Islamic development was quite rapid. The existence of the craft stone of Maulana Ibrahim as a pioneer to Islamization in Java, especially in Gresik, East Java, also completes that Muslims have not only carried out trade activities, maritime trade activities, but also the spread of religion at least since the beginning of the 15th century. At the end of the 15th century, trade endeavors fully controlled by Javanese merchants, but before the period, approximately in the late of 14th century, Majapahit Empire preferred given the attention at capital city to control maritime trading. In this way, kingdom gave authority to local ruler to control it, strictly with the foreign traders, and then time by time local rulers followed good relationship with traders, and it was totally controlled by the local ruler until the end of 15th century. This totally controlled by local ruler or Javanese merchants, and it's not more controlled by the kingdom. This is carving of Maulana Ibrahim, and this carving also in the calligraphy in Arabic. The sign of a Muslim Islam. It looks so coloring. And then this is one of the stone at Maulana Ibrahim Funeral Complex, which is like a craftsstone in Trollaya at the glance, same as the six of a Kubur Pitu, like a dome, like a cube. And this is in the Arifal. This is the last focus that we have. The Oliver of Islam's period caravan in the 15th century. The method of Islamization in Nusantara were via merchants, Muslim, which is come along with merchants and the ulama either from Arab or India or some Muslim origins country. So we have three theory that Islam, that spirit of Islam via merchants, via Muslim itself, and ulama. And in Java Islam, the style of Islam is more like the Islam in Southeast Asia. And the spreading of Islam in Java could identified by the existence of the ulama for the first time was Maulana Ibrahim and Maulana Ishaq in the 15th century. Maulana Ibrahim has the obligation to spread Islam in Gresik and surrounding, while Maulana Ishaq in Banyuwangi, still in East Java region, then married to Princess of Blambangan, the earlier name of Banyuwangi. But Maulana Isa, after married, he and his wife moved to Pasai, Sumatra. So he was not any related to in Java anymore. But Maulana Ahmad Ibrahim still stay in Gresik. And some literature also said that Maulana Ahmad Ibrahim and Maulana Isa still any relation in plotline. And this is sorry. Before Maulana Ahmad Ibrahim came to East Java, he has already come to Jam. He also did Islamisation there before he came to Java. Before he came to East Java, and he did crossing together with merchants in Jazz because we have the strengths with the statement from the craft that said about the merchants from Vietnam and South China actively did crossing in Java and around in the 15th and 16th century. So we assume that Maulana Ibrahim also come along with the merchants from Cham, for the Cham. And any presentation to the Arif of Maulana Ibrahim arrived at the part of Gresik. And he also has another name, Sunan Gibrik. The local people give him a lot of nickname. Mr. Sunan Gibrik also has another nickname like Kakek Bantal or the grandfather of below, Sheikh Maghribi, and many more. It's a lot of the nickname that he has. And about the pricing strategy of him, he was a page in peace without any violence. He preferred to choose cultural approach. For the first was he learned about the Japanese language, and he learned about the culture, about the custom, and also about the lifestyle of the Japanese people. After that, he opened minutes up like a grocery, but on the middle of this trading activity, he also did preach. He also preached about the Islam to every customer, and besides this, he also has another skill. They are expert in agriculture system and medical. Islamic medical, so people welcome and people welcome because Maulana Ibrahim told them with this choose skill free of charge, not any payment of this, so can improve the knowledge of Japanese people. And then until the one day, people approached Islam and convert to Islam in a huge scale. Knowing this, Maulana Ibrahim then put much pesucinan and then pesantren, which is a term for the people who want to learn Islam more. And here we reach the conclusion. At the end of the 15th century, the north coastal of Java was visited by many traders from various nations, whether from Western or Eastern. And the oldest Islamic heritage in Java was in north coastal and inside the capital city in Hinterland. So there are any two kind location of this site. The first is a north coastal as a base of economic center and a capital city in Hinterland, in capital city in Trouwland as a base of government center. And the last is interaction between local residents and traders from various nations in the world opens up the occurrence of cultural acculturation, including the spread of Islam. So that is enough for us. Thank you for your attention. Good afternoon.
Okay, so we are very thankful to our two speakers, Dr. Leslie and Ms. Dita, Nurfaizah. Both are talking to us about maritime trade in Southeast Asia. One talks about in relation to racism. The other one is in relation to the spread of Islam. We are now opening the discussion, further discussion. Those who are having questions and queries, our two speakers, Dr. Leslie and Miss Dita, is now ready for they're now ready for your further inquiries, if you have any. I think from the chat box, there is none yet, but there is one from Professor Xiao. Professor Xiao, do you have anything to ask from our presenters?
Hello. I would just like to react to the presentation of Ms. Dita Reista. Thank you
Yes.
for participating in this conference. I'm just opening some pictures here, but I would like to emphasize that I was just happy to see that some of the grave markers that she actually showed us were very similar to what we can see even in Zamboanga, in Sulu, the Tausugs, which we call the Sunduk grave markers. Okay, these are grave markers which, yeah, I think I have the, I just searched for it. But if you're going to look at the Sunduk grave markers, the designs that she showed us are already Islamic, okay? And sometimes they're made of stones, and sometimes they're made of wood. But what we believe is that that in the Philippines, that kind of practice is pre-Islamic, which meant that even before, because if you're going to look at how the sunduk is placed in the grave, it's like a person. The sunduk is a representation of the person on a boat, which is what our pre-colonial ancestors, the Austronesians, believed as where our souls will go to the afterlife. They're going to pass by the seas, and therefore the representation, like in the Manunggul-jar, the boat, the person, the soul in a boat, or the boat soul. And I think it's what we see now here with the Sunduk grave markers and the grave markers that you showed us is kind of similar to this. Okay, this is the this is one of the pictures that I'm going to show. It's just interesting. This is made of wood, but there are, and then in the Sunduk grave markers, you can identify if it's a male or a female. If I'm not mistaken, what I'll be showing you is a male, but in the female designs are more of oh, did I lose it? Yeah, I think I lost it. Anyway, doesn't matter, but I was just emphasizing this to show us that we are now realizing in every conference that the cultural connection that we have in each other that is beyond boundaries, you know, political boundaries. We really are in many ways the political boundaries and the being archipelagic does not actually separate us from each other if you look at the culture and the language that we have. So thank you so much, Miss Dita, for your presentation.
Yes, sir. Yes, bro.
Okay, do we have more from the participants? We still have enough time before we proceed to session 2, still on maritime trade in Southeast Asia. Okay, so we have also here from our very own Sir Fernando Santiago. Sir, take it away.
Okay. I have a reaction to Professor Leslie's earlier lecture. And well, I found very interesting how he discovered the contrast in the notion of race, okay, based on the travel narratives. So from the cultural to the biological. And the reason I found it to be quite interesting is that in my study of the Filipino search for identity, it appeared that during the late 19th century, the educated Filipinos were really confused on who they were and what they were, okay, the generation of Rizal. And eventually, well, Rizal was introduced to the idea of race, and he began to see himself as part of the Malay race. But then at the same time, based on his study of history, particularly the work of Morga, he found that aside from the cultural traits that made us one people, culturally, there was so much that really bound us together as well. So the bottom line is that essentially confirms your findings. But in the case of the Filipinos, both notions of race were adopted, okay, in their understanding of who and what they were. Okay, I just felt I had to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. I think that's an interesting observation. And, you know, from the US perspective, you know, people who, like me, are trying to understand structural racism and trying to understand how to defeat it, right? How to sort of get rid of this legacy. But I like your comment a lot because it also reminds us how damaging these ideologies were to the people that they were applied to, and this sort of you know, sort of pride that the people in Southeast Asia and Filipinos can feel about having this cosmopolitan and multicultural history. And we'll hear, I think we're going to hear more about this in the next panel. This idea that there was a good economy and there was a sort of productive relationships between different people in the region. It makes it very difficult for people in the 19th century to sort of think of themselves and where do they fit into these ideas. The 19th century philosophers, you know, were thought of as being the most scientifically advanced thinkers about the human species, and it seemed almost irrefutable to their findings seemed almost irrefutable, right? And so this confusion and this anxiety, you know, it seems sort of unfortunate, and I'm glad that we can have this conversation today. But certainly we didn't have to go through the last 100 years.
Okay, sir. So thank you very much, Dr. Leslie. We have actually two questions here. I think three, but the first one was withdrawn. Or shall we say it was answered already by Ms. Reista. One is coming from Maria Nela Florendo. She was asking, was the word Nusantara used in 16th century documents? Ms. Dita?
Yes. Okay. The term of Nusantara used in 16th century document actually is still uncertain for me too, because my friend Andri said that the term of Nusantara only used by a Hindu Buddhist kingdom, and it found it from old manuscript or like old manuscript and such a chronicle, and then in the 16th century they use the name of the regions. I mean this century in the 16th century it's not again using the word of Nusantara, the term of Nusantara, but it has already using the name of the regions like Malacca, like Cirebon, Chapara, and many more. Is it?
Okay, anyway, there's still another one question here for Miss Dita. She wants to be clarified if were you able to name some of these nations mentioned in your research?
Are you able to have the names of these nations? Oh, okay. It's like Persian, India, China, and then Cham at the time in the 15th century, right? For the maritime trading linkages in Indonesia at the time.
Okay, we proceed to the next question. This time is actually for Dr. Leslie. The question is from Archil Daog. Is there still any pragmatic use for race in our times? Dr. Leslie?
I'm going to rely on Dorothy Roberts and her book, Fatal Invention. there are some people who have suggested that these days we need to use race as sort of a as a proxy for more specific genetic information, and that is pretty easily debunked. Certainly, there are many people in the world who don't fit into the U.S. Census categories of race, and so this idea of trying to justify the continuation of these ideas certainly doesn't seem to be proper. And that being said, that doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. And certainly the idea of trying to stop people from sort of perpetrating racial prejudice is based on people's ideas of race. And so in the fight against racism, certainly there's a use for these categories in the sense that we want to show that they don't have any relationship to somebody's intelligence or to their abilities. But it's a hard question. Usually, I've taught a course on this subject, and usually when we get to the end of the 19th century and the eugenics movement and Hitler's final solution, it's very common for students to say, well, we had to go through this difficult time so that later on we could improve the science. And I think it becomes clear as you study these topics more thoroughly that it was this reliance on race-based ideas was a diversion and did not have a productive outcome. And certainly the last few years in my country have shown how revisiting these ideas don't necessarily add anything to the conversation when we could be making progress in science and in politics. We can end up having a conversation that is not very productive at all. But it's a hard question. I mean, yeah, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, anyway, thank you, Dr. Leslie. We have here a request from Sir Xiao. He is requesting that he be allowed to show the pics that he was referring to a while ago to Miss Dita. Okay, Xiao. Sir Xiao.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I think, where is it? Sorry. There. Can you see it? No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Okay, so this is the... Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
So this is the wooden sundok, where it is clear that you see some of the designs are, what you call this, they are similar, but also you see that the pre-colonial belief in the soul boat, or it's a soul on a boat going to the afterlife. This is a more similar, the other slide, this is a more similar design made of stone, like the ones that were shown in the presentation of Miss Dita. Yeah, they call the Sunduk Sama grave markers, and there are also wood versions like this as well. So they're representations of human beings on boats. And I actually, when I went to Zamboanga recently, I also saw it in a cemetery there. So it's a continuing tradition. Thank you.
Miss Dita, do you want to react?
No, I think it's enough. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's very interesting. That calls for a collaboration perhaps in the future. Southeast Asians doing something, the same thing, because after all, they have almost the same culture. Well, since we are actually, it's almost time for the next session. The next session will still be on the maritime trade in Southeast Asia, so we'll still be continuing on it. In the meantime, I'd like to congratulate the first two speakers, Dr. Christopher Leslie and Dita Reista, and her collaborator was Andri Setyo Nugroho. So thank you. That will be all for the first session. Now we move to the next, what do you call this one? session. But anybody who is who would like to have more discussion with our speaker, Dr. Leslie and Dita, we can actually give you their emails, so perhaps you can go on more scholarly discussion about this their topic on maritime trade. So are we ready for the next session? We are now on panel 2, Maritime Trade Still in Southeast Asia. Okay, so I think the speakers are now ready to join us. The first one is actually coming from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. He will be discussing to us pre-Hispanic maritime trade in Luzon. He is no less than Jasper Christian Gambito.
Good afternoon. Am I being heard?
Yes, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Jasper Christian Gambito, and I'm going to present to you my study about the pre-Hispanic maritime trade in Luzon. Prior to the culture contact with the Western colonizers in the 16th century, coastal communities had long existed in Luzon, as in other parts of the Philippine archipelago. These communities, which were usually situated near major river systems, mostly relied on maritime trade as their main economic activity. Early conquest accounts suggest the complexity of these communities. It was also noted that some of which had developed economic and military alliances and were bound by their kinship affinities. This paper seeks to present hypotheses on the existence of a coastal trade network from Ilocos in the northern tip of Luzon and possibly up to Bicol in its southernmost extent. Lexical evidence, particularly the dictionaries written by Catholic friar missionaries, as well as some pertinent archaeological finds, will be tapped with the researcher to prove his claim. The Philippines is usually described as a country divided by the sea. One cannot be blamed for having such kind of belief, especially because the country is an archipelago comprised of more than 7,000 islands. Although the sea separates the ancient Filipinos and their ancient neighbors from one another, this condition did not deter them from having connection and trade relations. Therefore, a revisit on ideas could give a realization that the sea is not a cause of division among the Proto-Filipino peoples and their Asian neighbors, but rather as an instrument in forging connection among the different pre-16th century communities. In the case of Luzon, the towering mountain ranges, vast plains, and other geographic features presented natural obstacles that may have prevented the peoples from having a smooth connection with one another. In the absence of a complex road network, the sea and the various bodies of water in the island played a crucial role in maintaining interconnectivity. While the bodies of water served as highways, the various boats and other sea crafts which plied the shores and river networks of the island facilitated the connection. For the sake of periodization, the pre-Hispanic period being referred to in this paper is limited to the proto-historic period, which ranges from the 9th century AD to 1521. Also, the term Luzon, which is used in this paper, is defined geographically, not politically. Thus, other islands such as Palawan, Masbate, Marinduque, and others, which are included in the southern Tagalog region, as well as the Batanes Archipelago, are not included in the scope of the study and may be a subject for subsequent research. Among the main difficulties in studying the pre-16th century Philippines is the lack of necessary documentary sources to create a narrative. Therefore, this paper will heavily rely on the studies made from allied disciplines, particularly from archaeology. Although this paper will tackle some of the trading activities done by the ancient peoples of Luzon, one of the goals of the research is to highlight the role of the boat in establishing connection among the pre-Hispanic riverine and coastal communities in the said island. Luzon and its pre-Hispanic setting. Luzon is the largest island in the Philippine archipelago. Prior to the culture contact with the Western colonial powers, early settlements and communities were already thriving in Luzon and were engaged with regional maritime activities as evidenced by various artifacts found in the said island. Among the archaeological sites which could suggest the existence of a maritime trading activities include the following. As flashed here in this presentation, the remains of a vessel referred to as a biray in Pandan, Kawayan, Ilocos Sur, the recovery of local potteries and Chinese ceramic wares in Bolinao, Pangasinan, along with the Bolinao skull, the origin of which were estimated to be between the late 12th to 13th centuries AD to the 14th and 15th centuries AD. The discovery of habitation sites as well as ceramic trade wares in Porac, Pampanga. The excavation of habitation and burial sites in Santa Ana, Manila, along with the discovery of Chinese trade wares estimated to be between the late 11th to the 14th century AD. The excavation in Pinagbayanan, Pila, Laguna, the earthenware complexes of Calatagan, Batangas, and the excavation in Albay province known as Cagraray cave sites, wherein Chinese porcelain and stoneware jars were recovered. Lara Juncker, in her book entitled Raiding, Trading, and Feasting, offered a new perspective, wherein she argued that contrary to the popular belief that the Chinese, Arab, and Indian traders were responsible for most of the long-distance trade shipping in the area, it was really the Malay peoples of Southeast Asia who facilitated the trade relation during the 10th century AD. The reason for this belief is mentioned by Scott, who assumed that the Chinese during the Tang dynasty had no knowledge on the existence of land between Taiwan and Java. However, the Chinese during the Sung dynasty had a different outlook. As Southeast Asian polities like Champa, Srivijaya, and Malacca started to trade luxury items with the Chinese, the latter took necessary actions to dominate this commercial activity. As evidenced by an edict found in ancient Chinese records, particularly in Songxi, superintendencies which supervised trade relations with the Arabs, Aceh, Java, Borneo, Mayi, and Srivijaya barbarians were established in Guangzhou, Hangzhou, and Pingzhou. For Scott, the inclusion of Mayi, which he presumed to be Mindoro, in the aforementioned Chinese document suggests its role as a trading center, facilitating the exchange of local goods on a Borneo-Phuket road, going further in assuming that it was a Bornean outpost. Ma Tuanlin, in his compilation of ancient Chinese documents entitled Wenshan Tongkao, mentioned that during the 7th year of the Taiping Xingkao period, certain traders from Mayi brought valuable merchandise to the Canton port. Scott calculated the year to be 982 AD and presumed that the Mayi merchants went there not on a tribute mission, but rather as direct traders. However, the belief that Mayi could be Mindoro was challenged by various individuals. For an instance, Ferdinand Blumentritt speculated that Mayi could either be Luzon, wherein Mayi could be its ancient name, Laguna de Bai, wherein he argued that Mayi was originally Bahi or Bahi, Bulacan, wherein Mayi was derived from the term Gatmaitan, referring to a chieftain named Maitan, who was the head of the area. Blumentritt's friend, Jose Rizal, also speculated that Mayi refers to the island of Luzon. On the other hand, Watiming's MA thesis, who argued that Mayi could be somewhere in Luzon and without dismissing the possibility that it could be in Laguna, speculated that it could be in the present-day Batangas. Another one was Gobon Juan, who speculated that it was in Bai in Laguna, which was referred to in the ancient Chinese texts. One of his considerations is that there are no Chinese equivalent for the sound of B in the Chinese, and the Chinese usually use the sound M to replace B. As an example, he related that Batangas is referred to by the Chinese as Batangan, Bataan as Miautaan, and Bicol as Mikot. One of his arguments stated that Laguna, particularly the lake area, is home to various archaeological sites wherein various trade wares were excavated as compared to Mindoro, which was inhabited by the Mangyans, whom he described as underdeveloped as of the present time, and wonders whether they were the same group of people described in ancient Chinese texts as the Mayi people who brought precious merchandise to the shores of Guangzhou 1,000 years ago. However, this presumption of Gobon Juan could not be easily dismissed, especially because of the fact that the Laguna copper plate, which is considered as the country's first written artifact, was discovered in the lake area, the content of which suggests a flourishing trade relations within the Tagalog region, mentioning pre-Hispanic communities of Paila, Puliran, and Tundun. Whether Mai is in Mindoro or in Laguna remains to be a question and could be a subject for further research. On the other hand, it was also during the Song dynasty that certain polities in the Philippines like Butuan started to send tribute missions to China. By the 14th century, the Ming dynasty rose to power, wherein their early rulers promoted commercial activities overseas. It was the records from this dynasty, particularly the Yunglo Datien, that mentioned Malilu, Mai, Butuan, and Sulu as dependencies of Brunei. However, Maguindanao, referred to as Mentolang, was included on another list based on Wang Taiwan's Tao I Chilwe, which was coming from the previous dynasty, the Yuan dynasty. Scott mentioned that various Ming dynasty historical records narrate the presentation of tribute embassies from Philippine polities like Luzon, Maulihu, presumably Mindoro or Marinduque, and Pangasinan. This information provide the necessary answer on how the various Chinese and Southeast Asian traders were able to reach the Philippines. Apart from the existence of coastal trading activities, interaction among the river communities also existed. A model was suggested by Juncker, which mentions that lowland-based communities competed with one another in order to attract long-distance traders to come and pass through their ports. These coastal communities rely on intra-regional and extra-regional trade involving interior communities, the latter serving as source of mountain products and the other upland raw materials, which could in turn be traded by the former. Her model was based on the previous work of Bennett Bronson on a similar phenomena in Sumatran maritime trading politics. For the sake of brevity, this paper will highlight the following areas as focus of the maritime activities done in Luzon during the pre-Hispanic period. First, the Northwest Luzon, particularly the Ilocos area. The second is the Central Luzon, particularly the Pampanga area. Third is the Manila area. Fourth, Southern Luzon, which includes Laguna, Batangas, and maybe to an extent, the Bicol region. Evidences in Northwest Luzon. Michael Canelao, in his dissertation, identified the following as the 5 gold networks in Northwest Luzon. The first one is the Tonglo network, which connects the mines of Balatok, Akupan to the coast of Arignay and Agoo. The second is the Gaswelling network, which connects the gold mines of Apayao, Lokho, Kapkaben, and Katampan to the coast of Kalikamasan, Baratao, and Bawan. The third one is the Lepanto network, which connects the Lepanto mines with the coast of Tagudin and Purao, traversing Apaya and Danak. The fourth one is the Angaki network, which connects Patyakan, Minlawi, and possibly Lepanto mines with the coast of Dumacuaque and Candon, and the Abra network. Following the model given earlier by Juncker, these gold networks identified by Canelao serve as a good example on the interaction between coastal and upland communities in Northwest Luzon. Gold, as well as other products coming from the mountains of the Cordilleras, were brought down to Ilocano coastal communities where they will in turn be traded to foreign merchants, particularly the Chinese. Although Spanish accounts mentions the richness of the Iloco coastal communities because of the gold found there, Canelao argues that the Ilocanos served as mediators only, and that the production of these gold items were from the mountain regions of Northwest Luzon. He added that although the Cordilleras and Ilocos might be separated by the terrain, it did not deter them from having trade relation. Although gold mining activities during the pre-Hispanic period were not as extensive as compared to present-day mining activities, the presence of these gold networks is the reason why the region was able to be a part of a wide-reaching maritime trade network, arguing that some of this gold might have reached China. The pre-Hispanic Central Luzon, the case of Pampanga. Just like in Ilocos, the presence of a riverine network referred to in other Philippine polities as Ilaya-Ilawud Network, is also evident in the case of Pampanga. Using the dictionaries of Father Diego Bergaño, Father Francisco Coronel, and Father Venancio Sanson, the existence of such network in Pampanga is referred to as Paralaya-Paroba Trade Network. Paralaya refers to the upstream direction. It also refers to either as the east, where the sun rises, or as north. Meanwhile, Paroba refers to the downstream direction and also refers to the orient, or the place where the sun sets. Paralaya communities refers to those located inland, while Paroba communities refers to those located along the coast of Manila Bay. The connection between the two sets of communities was made possible by the river networks crisscrossing Pampanga, serving as the province's first thoroughfares. Paralaya communities serve as sources of upland and inland materials like hardwood, wild rice, beeswax, and other exotica. These materials will then be sent to Paroba communities, which in turn will exchange trade commodities like jade ceramics, salt, and other lowland products. The exchange of trade goods is evidenced by the discovery of burial jars as well as Southern Song and Yuan Dynasty porcelains. In Hacienda Ramon in Porac, Pampanga, an area which is considered in this paper as a Paralaya community. Manila is considered as one of the oldest areas in the country which had been involved in maritime trading activities. The discovery of the pre-Hispanic community in Sapa and the excavation of various human burials, shells, remains of animals like pigs, as well as Chinese ceramics, along with other jewelry, suggest that the area was once engaged in a flourishing maritime commercial activity. All right. Now, for the case of Manila, Cesar Mahul argued that Manila, along with nearby areas, were already in the process of Islamization. As a consequence of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago and through the efforts of Bornean rulers who sent missionaries to further their trade relations and the extent of Islam. All right, I'm being mentioned that 5 minutes left. Okay, maybe I'm going to fast forward and going to the main point, the role of boats in commercial activities. I prepared here some of the terms in Ilocano, Kapampangan, and Tagalog dictionaries, which may refer to boats and other maritime trading activities. Now, I'm making a hypothesis here wherein I'm telling that the boat, which was primarily used by the peoples back then, was the biray. The terms mentioned in the tables were not as exhaustive, as there are several other terms which were not included in the list. However, for the sake of discussion, it is argued that these lexical terms serve as evidence on the existence of maritime trading terms on the subconscious mind of the peoples of Luzon. The rich pool of terms related to boats and other activities associated with it suggests the important role played by these vessels in connecting the riverine and coastal communities. On the case of Ilocos, there were terms referring to sampans and the consciousness of the existence of the people residing in distant lands. In Ilocano, they call it as balyu, suggesting the involvement or interaction with foreigners, presumably merchants. Now, as what is presented here in the slide, that is a viray, which is evident in the Ilocano, Kapampangan, and Tagalog languages. It is hypothesized that the biray is among the primary boats utilized by the Proto-Filipinos in conducting intercoastal trading activities in Luzon, although this hypothesis needs to be subjected to further research to prove the claim. The tendency of the use of biray in long-distance travel is evidenced by the definition given by Father Caro in his Spanish Ilocano dictionary, wherein he defined it as a small boat that could reach Manila. Scott, on the other hand, mentioned that these vessels were used to facilitate Manila, Iloco, Cagayan trade. On the other hand, Galang mentioned that the small size of these boats made it unstable. That is why these were navigated only near the shore and could possibly not be used in inter-island trading due to the tendency of being smashed by tall waves. While biray is hypothesized as the Among the primary boats used in facilitating intercoastal trading activities, small boats as well as rafts were used in facilitating internal trading activities between the coastal or riverine and the inland or upland communities. Now, for the conclusion. The quest for fully reconstructing pre-Hispanic maritime history is a journey which is yet to be completed. While this paper offers a hypothesis on the conduct of maritime trade and the use of specialized type of boats in facilitating it in the island of Luzon, the researcher is aware on its limitations. Maritime trade in this sense shall not be confined alone to coastal trading activities, primarily because among the main products which were traded by these communities were sourced inland or upland. Thus, a complete picture should include an external trade network. That is, in the case of this paper, the trade relation between the island of Luzon and the other East and Southeast Asian countries. The second is an inter-island or intercoastal trade network, which connects the various coastal communities in the island. And the third one is an internal trade network, which involves coastal or riverine and inland or upland communities. Before I end, I want to leave this quote which I made when I was still the curator of AIMS Museo Maritimo. The Philippines is not an archipelago that is divided by the sea, but an archipelago connected by the sea. The bodies of water serves as highways, while the boat facilitates the connectivity. That is all my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jasper, Sir Jasper Cambito. That was very enriching. For our participants, you can actually write your questions if you have any from the box Q&A and the chat box. Just press the button, corresponding button below. And for Sir Gambito, wait for a while. We will be back for the open forum. In the meantime, we proceed to the next presenter, still on maritime trade in Southeast Asia. A paper which has something to do with Lantak, the Southeast Asian roots of the fire piston technology. He's actually from University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Jeffrey James Ligiro. Sir James? Sir Jeffrey James, are you here? Okay.
Rohan. So let me first share my
screen. Okay. Check on your mic so we can hear you clearly.
I'll wait for share.
Okay.
Excuse me po. Can you, is my slide already on the screen?
Yes, yes.
So, okay.
Okay.
So, in this paper, the author would like to pay special attention to the ingenious fire-making device usually known as the fire piston, which have been found being used in the native peoples of Southeast Asia over the last 200 years. Previous colonial studies and accounts of this peculiar and very specialized method of fire production were attracted with the intriguing possibility that the device was invented in Southeast Asia independently of European influences, and possibly long before the 19th century when it appears to have been first observed here by European travelers. But the almost complete absence of documentation concerning pre-19th century technology in Southeast Asia on one hand, and the presence of a rich source of documentary evidence on the history of the fire piston in Europe in the early years of the 19th century, on the other hand, led European and American anthropologists and historians to conclude that the instrument's appearance in this region of Asia was the result of European colonialism. My chief concern in this paper is to discuss the case for believing that the fire piston was developed independently in Southeast Asia by the indigenous peoples, among whom it was found as an implement of practical everyday use. The author shall try to offer suggestions on arguments as to why the fire piston can be considered part of the ethno-technology of various peoples of Southeast Asia by discussing the geographical distribution of the fire piston in the region, the varieties of the peculiar method of producing fire in terms of the materials used, the process of making the implement, the socio-cultural and even economic aspects of its use, and the earliest record of its use. The fire piston is a device for lighting fire with the heat engendered by the sudden compression of air. This compression is effected by striking a plunger piston into a hollow cylinder. This cylinder must be true and the piston must be packed airtight and yet move freely. It is also necessary to admit free air to the inflamed tinder as soon as possible after compressing blow is struck, so as not to suffocate the spark. An essential element of this design is the presence of a well-fitting piston moving smoothly in a cylinder. The distribution of the fire piston...
Jeffrey, I'm sorry.
Yes,
your slide is not presenting properly. Yung Yeah, there. Thank you.
My problem, sir, is that I won't be able to read my notes or guides.
Okay. Sige. But be sure that they're moving. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you po. So the where was I? The distribution of fire piston is as peculiar as the utensil. It occurs in Southeast Asia from northern Burma or Myanmar to Luzon in the Philippines and to the Flores Islands in Indonesia. At least 14 different tracts, which however comprise only a small minority of the square miles in the total area of the region. Second, the fire piston was invented in France early in the 19th century and had a temporary vogue in Western Europe. It was reported from remote spots in Southeast Asia early in the 19th century, so that it could not well have spread to our region from France, and in the few decades intervening. In addition, the diversity of shapes, decorations, and materials is so great as to indicate that the fire piston must have had several centuries of development in this region. For instance, the material varies from wood to bamboo to carabao horn or ivory to brass to lead and lead lined brass. In reverse, there is nothing to indicate that any knowledge of Southeast Asian tool had reached France to serve as a stimulus or a suggestion for the invention there. There are, however, two other machines known in the region that are cylindrical and are used to compress air: the blowgun for poison darts, and the piston bellows to fan the blacksmith's fire. Moreover, Southeast Asia is one of the only two areas in the world in which the blowgun occurs and is the center of a single area of dispersal of the fire piston bellows. A pattern or precedent was therefore given in this region for the compression of air in a tube. Whether it was accident that led to the lighting of tinder, which had been introduced in the cylinder by change, or whether by manipulative play of the heating of the impounded air was discovered and tinder then deliberately inserted, no one can say with assurance. But almost surely it must have been one or the other. Moreover, the people of the region have evidently been given to playing with fire lighting in our history, since it is among us that the greatest variety of fire-making methods occurs. The fire saw with rattan, with split bamboo, with rod against rod, the fire drill, and among culturally related peoples like the Polynesians, the fire plow. We have therefore an attitude of mind favorable both to experimenting in this field and to seizing a workable implement if luck happened to present it. In Europe, the fire piston was discovered in 1802 either by a physicist in Lyon, France, operating a compression air pump, or by a workman in an arms factory near Lyon who was charging an air gun, a modern mechanical cousin of the Southeast Asian blowgun. This is probably another case of independent and simultaneous invention or discovery. Both the mechanic and the professor, however, were primarily doing other things when they made their observation and succeeded in lighting their tinder. The French invention was therefore clearly a case of accident profitably taken advantage of, and it was independent of the same principle that had been operative in Southeast Asia earlier. The European fire piston was used chiefly as anthropologist Edward Tylor expressed it, as a scientific toy or as a demonstration apparatus in the teaching of physics. It is patented in England in 1807, but in no European country was it able seriously to rival in practical use the long-established strike a light of flint and steel or tinder box. 3 or 4 decades later, both were swept aside by friction matches. The fire piston was considered from the angle of its invention with the finding that it was devised independently twice, in France in 1802 as a byproduct of physics and industrial technology, and in Southeast Asia as the byproduct of a pattern of air compression devices such as the blowgun and the piston bellows, plus a second pattern of experiment with fire-producing apparatus. It is worthwhile to consider further the distribution in this in this Asian region. According to the classic work of anthropologist and Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, curator Henry Balfour in 1907, the range of the fire piston extended sporadically over a wide area of Southeast Asia, occurring in at least 14 separate tracts scattered in Myanmar, the Philippines, and the Lesser Sundas in Indonesia. The 14 areas together comprise only a small fraction of the square miles in the total range. What can we conclude from this sporadic distribution? 14 separate inventions among as many peoples is unthinkable, particularly for so specialized and tricky a gadget as this. 2 or 3 inventions are barely within the range of possibility. One is much the most likely. This would then have spread. Such a spread presumably would have taken a few centuries, if not more. The local diversity of fire pistons in shape, size, and decoration is great enough to fit this inference. Thus, the material varies from wood to bamboo to horn to elephant tusk, or from this to metal, etc. A very recent work that had only just swept the area as a cultural trend would presumably still retain greater uniformity. The question remains, why did not most of the Southeast Asian populations hang on to the piston, or the knowledge of which at one time have reached them or their next door neighbors? The answer lies in the unusual variety of fire-making devices rampant in the area: fire cord, fire saw, fire drill, flint, and steel. There was too much competition for any one type to win out completely. Moreover, the piston is not easy to make. It must be true. It should have no leaks. It should be airtight, or it will not work. And while this is quick when it works, it takes a special knack to operate it. It is the most tricky and toy-like of all the devices. Here in Southeast Asia, we may we may suppose that it was kept up by individuals who like playing with it, exhibiting it as a luxury article requiring skill. Elsewhere, it came in but died out in the face of simpler and more reliable apparatuses. In this hypothesis, if this hypothesis is correct, Southeast Asian fire piston distribution would have been, as regards its detailed irregularity, mostly the result of non-acceptance or of loss of secondary disappearance. So let me show you the examples of fire pistons in the Shan states in Burma and in the Wa village in eastern Burma facing the Chinese border. The specimens of fire pistons collected in Bamo or around the district of Bamo in upper Burma or Myanmar. The fire pistons from the Kachins, fire piston from the Mandalay, fire piston from Mogok, fire piston from the Shans, fire piston from the southern Shans, fire piston from Luang Prabang, from the old state of Patani in the Malay Peninsula, or from the Siamese Malay states. Another example of fire pistons from the Siamese Malay states. And then going down, fire pistons in Sumatra, fire pistons in Borneo, fire pistons still in North Borneo, in Java, and in the Flores Island, and finally some of the fire pistons in the Philippine Islands or in the Philippines. So there are related to the argument that the fire piston was already in use in Southeast Asia prior to Western colonialism. Are the questions regarding whether it is whether the technology was invented in Southeast Asia or it was invented in Europe and imported to Southeast Asia, or the other way around. So in 1907, Henry Balfour said that the fire piston possibly developed independently in Southeast Asia as well as in Europe. While in 1969, a physics professor of the University of Lancaster, Robert Fox, said that the fire piston was first invented in Europe and was introduced to Southeast Asia by the British by virtue of either of trade and or conquest. And the recent studies on the fire piston technology claim that it was not only invented independently in Southeast Asia, but also introduced from the region into Europe. In this paper, I would attempt to discount the claim or possibility that the fire piston was introduced from Europe. The peoples of the region who employed the fire piston were already using the implement even prior to the arrival of European explorers or colonizers. One example, in this slide, you can see the orang, an example of the people who remained outside of the Western influence and colonialism, but employ this kind of technology even up to today. So the Orang Asli people, who were believed to be part of the so-called Indonesian or Proto-Malay, quote-unquote, group of inhabitants in the peninsula, who were considered a minority in Malaysia, or let us say the historical enemy of the Malay or slave trading prey of the Malay, and who remained at the margins or periphery of British colonialism has preserved the knowledge of fire piston, of the technology. In fact, a man by the name of Jamre is still manufacturing the lantak api together with native blades or padang and access with flexible handles for sale online. In the case of the Philippines, the Igorots, Dash Tinggians or the Bagos of Luzon and the Bukidnons of Mindanao also employed fire piston. This group of peoples resisted colonialism and were ruled only nominally by Spanish colonial government during the 300 years of their rule in the country. So, an evidence that the area where the fire piston in the Philippines was documented was far from the colonial metropolis, or far from Manila, or at least far from Bigan, is for example, the current transportation situation. So if you want to go there, you will cross a river like this 13 times. As of 2012, when I was doing my research. And you can find there that there are still old men. As of 2012, there was still old men who knew how to make this kind of fire piston. And you see, compared with the previous specimens of fire pistons, which I have shown, this is another unique design because the cylinder and the container of the tender was carved in a single piece of wood. And then we should not be we should also be proud as Filipinos, because the example of fire pistons can also be considered at par with the beautiful fire pistons of Malaysia. So you can see here the collection of Dr. Pardo de Tavera, a fire piston he called Sumpak, made of silver and carabao horn, carved with unusually elaborate floral designs. And Dr. Rizal was also interested in this technology of our ancestors. So he, in his first homecoming, he sent a specimen of the fire piston to his Bohemian friend, Dr. Ferdinand Blumentritt. And Blumentritt, who was very active in the various ethnographic and geographic societies in Europe, was very interested about and he was very interested about the native peoples of the Philippines, appeared to be ignorant of the presence of the fire piston technology in Southeast Asia, saying that it not only enriched his Philippine treasures or collection, but also increased his Philippine vocabulary with new terms that were not known to him. So in his reply to Rizal's letter, he declared that the Sulpakan, or the Tagalog lighter, was an argumentum vivum, or living evidence of the great talent of the Indios. The rich body of native terms for the fire piston in this region is a strong evidence that the technology is native to Southeast Asia. So even the richness of materials used in manufacturing the fire piston. For example, my collections, most of them were made of wood, but some were made of horn, and then they used, like the Malaysian fire piston, the fire piston from Tiagan in Ilocos, Luzon, Philippines, also used the fiber of the breadfruit. And just like the Malay fire pistons, the Filipinos, or the Itnegs or Tinggians or Bagos of Tiagan use grease made of carabao fat to lubricate the piston, in order that it may slip in more smoothly in the cylinder. Meanwhile, in the other groups, especially in the Malay Peninsula, they usually use saliva in lubricating their fire piston. But in the presence of visitors or travelers, for the sake of politeness, they use water. Okay, so let me show you the style of the way of making fire using the fire piston. So you apply a small amount of carabao fat in the piston, and then put a pinch of cotton soot at the cup of the one end of the piston, and then insert it suddenly, and then you will have a fire. Okay, finally, the most conclusive evidence of my claim of the Southeast Asian roots of the fire piston technology is the reference to the fire piston in the Philippines by the Franciscan lexicographer Pedro de San Buenaventura, who worked with Tagalog Ladinos Tomas Pinpin and Domingo Luwag, while the friar was assigned in the town of Pila in the province of Bae in 1613. Thank you very much.
That was very enriching and very interesting anyway, Sir Jeffrey James. Anyway, maybe we are now open for the open forum. May I now call on Mr. Gambito to join us so that, and then how do you get your screen, Sir James, so that we'll now be ready for the open forum. Okay, so Jasper Gambito is here with us now. I'll start with the questions, several questions that are actually perhaps can be simply answered. And if ever we will lack time, because the next session will start also at 3:30, then perhaps those who have questions can actually directly ask our presenters. To Mr. Gambito, the question here is, what reference or books did you use for the types of boats in the presentation? Are they available online?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they were available online. However, during my days as curator at the Museo Maritimo, I happened to become acquainted with Mr. Ray Santiago, and he became a personal friend of mine. That is why he was able to give me some of his personal documents, which served as my sources for these different kinds of boats. As a matter of fact, if you're going to search in the internet, the mostly used sketches of these ancient sea vessels were drawn by Ray Santiago. Some of the originals were handed over to me.
Okay. Still another question for you, Sir Gambito, about Biray. Are there any attempt by scholars to recreate a replica of the said boat, just like what they did to the Balanghay boats? How is it different from the Balanghay in terms of technical and structural technology in making the vessel? Yes, sir. Go.
All right. By the way, this could be a subject for another talk. Maybe we could have a personal correspondence. I will give my email, or maybe the organizers could give my email. However, my study is based on the paper presented by some members of the National Museum, and it said that there is remains of a biray in Pandan, Kawayan, Ilocos. However, these remain to be in situ because other archaeologists would say that it would be best to leave these sites in its condition, not to excavate it, so that it could be subject for deterioration. That is why, just like in Butuan, there are some balangay boats which remains to be in situ in order to prevent further deterioration. I have no idea whether there are some attempts by other scholars in recreating balangay. What is the difference in terms of the structural technology? There are different kinds of vessels in the Philippines in the pre-colonial past. We have the plank-built boats, etc., etc. So as what I've mentioned, I would be very happy to have personal correspondence with you, sir, so that we could have more fruitful discussions.
That was a question from Jason Salibay, and the previous one was from Sherwin Romosa. We still have third one. Highly from Nonya Tionco. Highly interested in including the presentation of Mr. Jasper Gambito in Santa Rosa Study Center Inang Bayan, Santa Rosa Heritage Series with other papers. Okay. It's not really a question, but it's something like a request coming from you. From you that your paper be included in the Santa Rosa Study Center. Do we still have more questions? You can actually react or probably send an email to Nonya Tionco.
Yes, ma'am, I will.
Okay. So, do we still have question here?
I think there was a message in the chat box, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm trying to read. There's a very long question here. For Professor Jasper. Do you have any information related to Malacca-Luzon trade in the 15th century? As I understand, during the early Portuguese Malacca, the Portuguese placed a Luzones as a tuminggung in the city of Malacca. Thank you for your response. Okay.
Hello, thank you for the question. As what I've said, what I'm doing right now is a preliminary study, and as what I've said in the conclusion, it is a subject yet to be completed. However, my preliminary information about the Malacca-Luzon trade is based on the writings of Mahul. Okay, it is said that that Luzon is a part of the Sulu zone, and the Sulu zone is the main center of trading activities during that time, and Sulu is connected with different parts of Southeast Asia, like Malacca and Brunei. So Luzon is just a part of that bigger Sulu zone, based on the writings of Cesar Mahul.
Okay, you can actually refer to the chat box. There are actually many who responded to you, something like basic information on what you can do in the sharing of your study. For Mr. Ligero, it's actually from Sir Ambet Ocampo. He is saying he can send you a photo of the Sokpakan, then that result sent to Berlin Museum. So you can also refer to this. Okay, what else? Do we still have more? No more questions in the chat box?
Excuse me, I think there is a question from
Q&A. There's still,
sorry.
Yeah. May I kindly, it's actually coming from John Emmanuel de Guzman. May I kindly ask for the slides of the presentation? Oh, well, it's Sir Jeffrey. Someone is asking for your slides. John Emmanuel de Guzman, probably because they were not able to see very much your slides a while ago. For Sir Ligero again, where's the oldest lantak or fire piston found in Southeast Asia? Is there any archaeological study made about this?
The first specimen collected in Southeast Asia was from Borneo and Java in 1865.
Okay.
But regarding archaeological studies or findings, I haven't encountered any yet.
So there's still another question. Thank you, sir. That's coming from an anonymous attendee. From Maria Nella Florendo. Sir Jasper, are there also studies on maritime northeastern Luzon? Or is the absence of studies due to the fact that the northeastern coastline is not conducive to maritime trade character of the coastline?
All right, ma'am. The question is about the Northeast. I have no idea about the Northeast. If there are any available studies about the Northeastern Luzon, maybe that could be an interesting topic for further research. The only idea I have are the writings of Christopher Bueno and Michael Canilao based on the Northwestern Luzon studies.
Okay, so I think the drawing from Philemon, what's this? Professor Gambito, the drawing of the prehistoric, what is that? Where is that? The drawing of the pre-Hispanic coastal boat showed the parts of the vessel and the term identified them. For instance, so I think there's no question here.
Let me answer that, ma'am. Maybe
okay,
he's clarifying.
Can react on it.
Yeah, maybe he's asking why is it because I presented a description of a biray and it uses some Spanish terms in referring to the different parts of the boat. The study is based on the writings of Santiago and Maharlika Cuevas, wherein it is more on anthropological study. That is why they were able to interview contemporary people. You see, Biray, although it existed during the pre-Hispanic times, it continued to exist during the Spanish colonial period until the American period. And Christopher Bueno argues that the last Biray was docked in Pandan in 1970s. So the study of Santiago and Cuevas was based on contemporary terms used by locals with reference to the different parts of the Biray. And it does not necessarily mean that the terms used were also the same terms used during the pre-Hispanic period.
Okay, so very good clarification. Do we still have, I think we have no more questions in the Q&A box. Do you see? Okay, so that we can actually move on to the next chat box. No more. As you can see, there are a lot of, well, they are not really that questions. They are some sort of a sharing, simply because we are PHA members and we, as members, it's part of our collaboration and we help each other. And so you gave us very enriching topics. There are also those who will be very willing to give you more to enrich also your, what they call this one, paper or your research. Since we are actually, it's almost time. And this is our way of saying thank you from the Philippine Historical Association and other partners of this conference to Mr. Jeffrey James Ligero and Mr. Gambito, I forgot, Jasper Christian Gambito for that very interesting and enriching papers. So thank you. And then I think we are ready for the next, unless, as I was saying, if there are participants who wants to ask more questions, you can actually email our Kapwa, PHA. They are also members of this organization. So we can move actually to the next session. I think it's still on maritime trade, but this time it will be taken over by, oh, there's a hand raised. Where is that? Someone is asking? Ma'am, hand raised. Do we have any? I can't see in my... Please ask Mr. Felimon to speak. Who is Mr. Felimon? Can we please? Okay, Sir Felimon. Go ahead, sir.
The drawing that you presented, Professor Gambito, of the coastal boat, it showed the terms of the various parts. And I noted that some of the terms were in Spanish. But if these were pre-Hispanic, they should be using local words. So why is it that, for instance, you indicate, what was indicated there was timon for the rudder, and camarote for the cabin with the nipa huts on the boat. Why were these terms used during that time? Why were the Spanish words used during the pre-Hispanic time?
Did you get that, Sir Jasper Gambito?
Yeah, I think that was the subject of the clarification I made earlier. As what I've mentioned, Sir Philemon, the study is based on the article written by Reynaldo Santiago and Maharlika Cuevas. They interviewed contemporary locals from Ilocos region. Therefore, the basis of the different terms used in the different parts of the boats were based on contemporary locals. That is why there are some terms which were in Spanish. You see, the biray, although it was used in the pre-Hispanic period, it continued to thrive during the colonial period. And as what I mentioned, Christopher Buena said that the last biray docked in Pandan in 1970. So therefore, some of the terms, some of the Spanish terms were inculturated, I think, or used by the locals. That is why there are terms like timon, camarote, cabina, etc. So that's my view on that, Sir Philemon. I think, I hope that clarified your concern.
Thank you very
Okay,
much,
thank
Mr.
you.
Gambito. Thank you very much. You'll have a really very interesting correspondence with Mr. Philemon after this. Okay, so shall we move to the next panel? You have the third panel. Ma'am Gloria? Okay,
Yes.
it's your turn. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. This is Gloria Melencio of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and PHA board member, who will act as your presenter and moderator in this afternoon's panel presentations. Now for the first paper presenter for panel 3 with the topic Maritime Trade in Southeast Asia. Let me introduce to you our first panel speaker to present his paper entitled The Malacca-Moluccas Trade During the Portuguese Period is from the Universitas Negeri Malang, Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Professor Daya Negeri Wijaya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really happy to be here, and it's my pleasure to join this enlightened conference. Honestly, I learned a lot during this conference, a lot of things that I don't understand. Today, I would like to share my proposed paper concerning Portuguese Malacca and Moluccas trade relation, but I try to make my paper title more appealing: Managing Malacca, Expanding to the Spice Island, Portuguese Malacca trade networks during the 16th century. As I propose, I try to understand the economic growth of Portuguese Malacca in terms of their trading networks. In this occasion, I try to narrate the Portuguese Malacca's networks to the Spice Island. As we understand together, Spice Island are situated in the Celebes and Papua. According to the local chronicles, we understand that the Spice Island refers to the producer of the spices, or we can call it Moluccas, including Ternate, Tidore, Makian, Bacan, and Moti. We have also other island called Jailolo or Halmahera as a producer of spices. As a commodity, as I understand, the spices might be a principal merchandise to be bartered to other products. Therefore, all nations are trying to come, load the clove, maces, and nutmegs, and spread abroad and barter and spread to other countries. I try to from the current slide. Can you see my slide? The Portuguese also attempted to join the spice trade in Asia. Before going further to search where the spice is coming from, the Portuguese tried to establish the Estado da India, stretching from the east coast of Africa to the far east, East Asia, Japan, China, and Eastern Indonesia. The Estado da India was centered in Goa as the Portuguese conquered in 15th and 10th. After Albuquerque conquered Malacca in 1511, he realized that spices were not grown in Malacca. Spices came from the other part of area in eastern Indonesia. He sent armada to find Spice Island. Some previous studies have already conducted, not only in the focusing in the Malacca, Moluccas, or Malacca Moluccas relation. But the Portuguese historians try to use only, they utilize the Portuguese sources, and Indonesian historian try to utilize the local sources and the Dutch sources. And I try to collecting all the sources and using Eurasian sources to re-narrate the Portuguese Malacca trade network to Moluccas. I will try to divide my paper into three sub-themes, comprising expedition to the Spice Island, monopolizing the cloth trade, and losing the control of the cloth trade. As I said earlier, the use of Eurasian perspective, I think, is supported by the availability of the sources. From the European side, we have Italian, Portuguese, Dutch, Spanish, and English chronicles and archives, and travel literature as well. From Asian eyes, we have Hikayat Tanah Hitu, Kronik Bacan, and Hikayat Ternate. The Portuguese first fleet to the Moluccas was organized in Malacca in 1511, in November 1511. Albuquerque, Afonso de Albuquerque sent Abreu, Sehau, and Simão Afonso to make a survey on the local custom, duties, and Moluccan spices in the eastern Indonesia. Abreu reached Banda Islands and sailed back to Malacca after he loaded the abundance of nutmegs and maces. And his journey continued by Francisco Sehau. Sehau arrived in Ternate by accident. His vessel was wrecked and found by the Ambon Asilulu. He assisted the Asilulu to destroy their enemy in Hoamoal, right now in Seram Island. The Portuguese sophisticated military technology, as Professor Faris Nur explained yesterday, spread out to the Moluccas. The both Ternate and Tidore Sultanate, they have the myth of Iron Man. So people coming from the far and they wear the iron clothes, something like that, could bring the welfare for the Malucan people. So it's like a myth that mean their consciousness. So the Sultan Ternate invited Sehau to Ternate. The Sultan gave some privilege, including the land to erect the fort and monopoly of the cloth trade. Other expedition, as I try to narrate in the my PowerPoint, was sent in order to ensure that the Portuguese could make trade regularly to the Moluccas. And the Portuguese could erect the fortress named Nossa Senhora de Anunciada after Dom Tristão had confirmed that the local asked the Portuguese to erect the fortress. Antonio de Brito came to the Moluccas in 1521 with two main duties of erecting the fortress and standing the Portuguese monopoly in the Moluccas. De Brito was assisted by the Prince Tarues to establish the fortress. They named the fortress with Fortaleza de São João de Baptista, but when they opened officially, they renamed it into Nostra Senhora de Rosário when the fortress was officially opened in 1523. The fortress was functioned to the Portuguese as center of political administration, military operation, and commerce. After erecting the fortress and managing the bureaucracy, Antonio de Brito, the first governor of Portuguese in Ternate, also considered northern route to the Moluccas. For him, this route was a shorter way to the Moluccas from Malacca. Compared to the southern route from Malacca to the Moluccas via Java, it's going too long for him. It also, the northern route decreased the highest cost of maintaining the stability of the Malacca-Moluccan route, trade route. They should encounter, for example, the Japanese, Gujarati, and the Malay merchant. They are really rich at that time. And the practice of Portuguese monopoly could be best understand from trade duties and networks. The Portuguese crown sent their cloth ship, and they allowed the fidalgos or the gentlemen. They didn't allow the Portuguese caçados or the Portuguese retired armies. They allowed both of the citizens to load the cloth in Ternate. In return, the fidalgos should pay a third of the cloth that they loaded in Ternate. Other additional duties they should pay on departure, on the transit, for example, in Malacca or in Brunei, and on arrival in Ternate. Each of them is 8% of the cargo. After loading the clothes, they brought the clothes to the Malacca, where the spice exported to East Asia, China, Japan, Southeast Asian mainland in Pegu, India, and small part of the cargo was brought to Portugal. The Portuguese monopoly was not running as smoothly as I understand. They should encounter some threats from the Spanish presence and the local dispute. The Spanish came to the Moluccas and bought the clothes with the better price compared to the Portuguese. The Portuguese king, Dom Manuel, protested the Spanish presence and claimed the Moluccas as their possession. The Spanish defended their presence by giving a fact that the Portuguese had trespassed the Treaty of Tordesillas. The dispute came to an end when the political marriage lead to reconcile each other. As we know, we have Treaty of Saragossa. It's unique and funny for me because the European tried to defy our plan. They didn't consider that we have the local sultanates there involving the Tidore and Ternate sultanates, but they don't care about that. And the Portuguese also handle the local resistance to secure the monopoly of the cloth trade. They should intervene to political succession in Ternate. De Brito and Tarues, for example, attempted to enthrone Sultan Dayalo. For De Brito, he was afraid of Dayalo because he was a grandson of Sultan Tidore of Al-Mansur. for Tarwes, he tried to gain a crown. He was a brother of Sultan, a young brother of Sultan Tayang. The people of Tidore and Jailolo in the Halmahera Island frequented to resist to the Portuguese monopoly. The captain of Portuguese captain, for example, was often to raise up the clove duties. It was unfair for them, and they smuggled and sold the cloves to the Portuguese competitors, for example, Javanese, Gujarati, and Malay Muslims. During his reign, the famous Sultan of Ternate, Sultan Hairun, protested the governor for the custom policy imposed by the governor, for example, Duarte de Eka, and he also protested the presence of Portuguese naval armada in Moro. The Portuguese captain, Diego Lopes de Mesquita, blamed him because he seems to obstruct the Portuguese monopoly and Christianization. Mesquita attempted to murder the Sultan to run his responsibility. However, the death of Sultan led the Portuguese to move from Ternate after his son, Sultan Baapuloh, besieged the fortress in 1574. The Portuguese left Ternate and moved their trading base to Ambon, where they had erected the fortress in 1578. Sancho Vasconcelos, the first Portuguese captain in Ambon Island, he had erected the Portuguese fortress in Ambon called Nossa Senhora Anunciada in 1574. In 1578, Sancho Vasconcelos was invited by the Sultan of Tidore to erect a fort in Tidore. The Sultan of Tidore was really afraid of Baabulah's invasion. They erected Fortaleza da Tidore before the Spanish renamed it into Marico Fort. And the Dutch penetration in the late 16th century led the Portuguese to the end. The locals were not happy with the Portuguese monopoly. They asked the Dutch to expel the Portuguese out from the Moluccas. They did with the joint forces between the Ambon, Hitu, and Dutch. They expelled the Portuguese out from Ambon in 1605. This occasion also happened in Tidore. The Dutch also destroyed the fort of Tidore, or Fortaleza da Tidore, in 1605. And to conclude, I just consider that the use of Eurasian sources, seems to be more humanistic for me to narrate the global encounter. And also, the Portuguese monopoly of the clove trade was not taken by force, but by the native grant. In return, the Portuguese should assist the locals to invade their enemies. And the maintenance of the Portuguese monopoly was determined by political and logistical chains. And it happened when the Dutch in the next century, they tried to monopolize the locals, and the stability of the Dutch monopoly was determined also by the political and local dispute as well. So this is some of my selected bibliography, comprising both European and Asian sources. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Wijaya. Please stand by for the questions that will be given to you after the second and last paper presentation. Now, I will change hats from a moderator. I will now be a paper presenter. Again, I am Gloria Melencio of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And the title of my paper is, wait, I will be sharing my screen. Can you see the screen now? Can you see my PowerPoint presentation? The title of, thank you. The title of my paper is Southeast Asia and the Visayas Islands, Maritime Trading and Migration, 1511 to 1744. This paper is an initial research about the maritime trading and migration in the Visayas Islands and its interaction with countries in Southeast Asia and European colonizers from 1511 when Portugal invaded Malacca. Coverage of the research period ends in 1744 when the Gahoy started the Bohol Revolt as a reaction primarily to Spain's subjugation as he put up his stronghold in Ilihan, a refuge where villagers evacuated and established their collective farm that supported the Visayan rebels for 85 long years. The letter B in the word Visayas is actually a historical standpoint. I prefer the B as in beta rather than the Hispanic V as in Victoria. That is present in the Baybayin, the ancient Filipino writing. Now, the Muslims, principally Arab traders, dominated the maritime trading from the Red Sea to the China Sea for many centuries before Portugal initiated the European economic penetration of Southeast Asia by capturing Malacca. In the latter part of the 16th century, maritime traders from England, Spain, Holland, and France also joined in the maritime trading. In an attempt to monopolize the spice trade in Southeast Asia, Portugal tried to capture all non-Portuguese vessels, more so the entry of Arab, Persian, and Muslim traders, blocking off other Asian countries to international trading. This did not deter, however, the increase in the local maritime trade in the Southeast Asian region. The competition for profits actually increased the ingress and egress of maritime vessels. Chinese junks remained active despite threats along the way and intense conflicts of European countries. Noted anthropologist Felipe Landahocano said the archipelago had already been engaged in foreign trade before the coming of the Westerners that began in 800 BC. The presence of cornelian beads in the archaeological sites document this early trade because these materials could only be had in India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the neighboring countries. By about 200 BC, jade became one of the dominant items for ornaments, and jade could only be had in Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and China. Before Portugal's invasion of Malacca, aggressive trading and porcelain that belonged to the Ming Dynasty in the 14th through the 16th centuries had already been going on. Chinese emperors even made great attempts to monopolize their local industries and tried to regulate external trade. Philippines had already been trading with Malacca, Makassar, Siam, Annam, Borneo, Brunei, and Canton before Magellan came in 1521. Pigafetta in his chronicle said that a Siamese junk had come to Cebu to buy gold and slaves by the time they were there. Likewise, he described Humabon's abode as that of a king with plenty of food, wine, women, and a retinue of datos who, like him, had the ripon. And the word ripon can be read from the Scots book. Trading centers then in the Visayas were Cebu, Leyte, Samar, Panay, Negros, and Bohol. These islands, however, were densely populated compared with other Asian polities. Indian traders imported a special kind of seashell from Bohol that was used as a form of monetary exchange in Southeast Asia. Negros' local products for trading were wet and dry rice, corn, beans, and fruits. Thus, maritime trading states along the coast had evolved. Tanhay or Tanday settlement may have been one of a number of small-scale maritime-oriented chiefdoms along the eastern coast of Negros Islands in the trade interaction, according to Junker. Cebu was a large-scale maritime trading chiefdom in the 15th and 16th centuries. Magellan's expedition was directed to Cebu as the most important trade port in the Visayan Islands and the seat of regionally powerful chief. Based on archaeological records, Cebu has relatively high densities of Ming period Chinese porcelains, as well as Siamese and Annamese wares from the astounding Celt sites in the habitation deposits, and that was according to Junker. Archaeological diggings in Cebu was limited because of the city structures already built above the ground. Painstaking study revealed that substantial quantities of iron and bronze fragments, as well as iron slug and possible fragments of crucibles used in the smelting process, attested to a large-scale metallurgical industry in Cebu. This coincides Pigafetta's record that Dato Humabon's large wooden residence contained craft workshop for metal production, extensive elite retinue draped in gold and other status goods. The Spaniards were also served exquisite food on impressive and imported porcelain. Spain's galleon trade began its flagship sail to the Philippines, closing off the country to its neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, when Adelantado Miguel Lopez de Legazpi set foot in Cebu in 1565. He led the construction of Fuerza de San Pedro, a fortress of Spanish defense in Cebu, to secure the physical safety of the Spanish military might in the region. Cebu had become Spain's gap of point to Luzon, Mindanao, Borneo, and Brunei colonization. Jesuit priest Ignacio Alsina called it Ibabaw, and Legazpi identified it as Sibabaw in his report to the king. As you can see, this is a port in Samar, close to Tandaya. This place in Samar was developed into a port for maritime trading in the Visayas. Durable forest woods found in these islands were made into galleon ships using the local labor in Samar and Leyte, who are experts in indigenous bone making and seafaring. The Spanish policy of Poloy Servicios mandated native males 15 to 60 years old to render free labor for the Spanish crown. Palapag, also in Samar, was a shelter for the galleons during stormy weather. It lies between the islands of Lawaan, Batag, and Kahayangan on the northernmost of Samar and in the Strait of San Bernardino. Local produce of Samar and Leyte, such as coconut, rice, root crops, sago fish, and coconut wine, locally called tuba, had fed Legazpi and his men and the succeeding Spanish expeditions to the Visayas. Tuba and fish kinilaw also reached Mexico by way of the galleon trade. This spirited tuba found its way in the galleon ships, maybe from Ibabaw or the Palapag ports and shipyards, then to Manila, and finally to Acapulco. Its popularity and brisk sales had threatened to kill the wine industry, as it plunged the sale of the expensive wine in Spain and Mexico. Several tuba frescoes offering this Visayan wine by the roadside were put up for sailors, travelers, and others who found tuba a better wine than the Spanish brandy. Imports of the Spanish wine fell, that competitors petitioned the king to send the Visayans to their homeland. It was a punishment for interfering in the Occidental wine business. Okay. Adding insult for the Spanish crown was the Visayan fish kinilaw that goes well with the tuba for the tuba drinkers as pulutan. Not only goods were traded, but also slaves. Slave raiding was done after harvest season when the people had already gathered their farm produce and when the seas were already calm. The yet to be Christianized region was the middle of the tug of war between Spain and Muslim Mindanao for warm human bodies to be baptized as Christians for the following servicios or to be converted to Islam in Mindanao. Pirates, again, the word has to be interrogated, and slave traders abound and lurk in Cebu, Bohol, Panay, Negros, Samar, and Leyte, even reached Camarines and Masbate. In 1572, members of the Loaiza expedition learned that 8 men of Magellan were captured in an ambuscade in Cebu after Lapu-Lapu killed Magellan. They were sold to the Chinese in exchange for metal goods. In 1599, Dato Salicula of Maguindanao and Dato Sirungan of Buayan gathered 3,000 warriors in 50 sailing boats and captured 800 Visayans in a raid in the coastal towns of Panay, Negros, and Cebu. Again, this would be repeated. Inspired by this victory, Dato Sali repeated this feat the following year in Iloilo, bringing home again 800 Visayan captives. Warren estimates that 2,000 to 3,000 Visayans were sold as slaves in Mindanao, Malacca, Makassar, Borneo, and Brunei per year in the 18th century. Visayan seas became the battleground among Western colonizers and maritime traders. So Spain had its hands full with attacks and raids coming from the Muslims in the Visayas, from the Chinese junks, and from the threat of the Dutch for maritime supremacy. Spain finally initiated a peace treaty in March 1609 with Muslim leaders to call for a truce. About 2,000 armed Muslim warriors attended its signing. This truce was only for 4 years as Muslim leaders attacked Samar and later again in eastern Visayas. Dato Paglalanom captured 450 Visayans that he loaded in 30 ships in 1613. Slaving trading posts in the 16th century were Makassar, Malacca, Aceh, Banten, and the newly found Batavia, Jakarta at present. Alcina, in his 17th century 3-volume book about the Visayan Islands, corroborates the slave raiding and trading of the Muslims in Samar and Leyte, who had been living in the Reducción, who were always in chaos and in fear. Many towns in the region has the name Tanawan or Tanawan or Bantayan, a high sentry overlooking the coast to spot immediately the raiding pirates and Muslims so as to warn the community quickly of the impending danger. According to Junker, the Spanish attempts to reduce raiding and slave raiding, actually the Spanish friars sometimes ransom the captive slave in some cases. And this resulted in the abrupt decline of the Sultan's rule in the 18th and 19th centuries. Interpolitic competitions for resources resulting in a large-scale interregional warfare in the 16th century, extended until the 19th century, and had caused chaos, fear, and thus migration of peoples. The Boholanos migrated to Maluco. The Makassars migrated to Samar and Bicol. When Alcina asked the Samareños for their roots, they responded that they came from Makassar. The Bicolanos also came from Makassar based on his interview in the 17th century. From a dense population in the 16th century, population in Leyte, Bohol, Isla de Fuegues, that's Siquijor, because of the many fireflies at night. So that's an island on fire. Negros, Guimaras, and Panay increased in the 17th century. Population in Cebu and Panay was at 2,000 each, more or less. And Chirino based his estimate on the amount of tributes the Catholic Church received during this time. Migration of peoples in Bohol and Cebu were easy to do because the two islands are near to each other. Likewise, the two islands face Mindanao, and thus migration from Mindanao to Cebu or to Bohol and vice versa was possible. The people of Dawis, a settlement in the island of Panglao in Bohol, migrated to Dapitan, the northern part of Mindanao, where Jose Rizal was deported. And this happened when the people from Ternate turned their vengeance on them after a conflict with the Dawis Datu over his wife. While trading in Dawis, a man from Ternate got interested in the Datu's wife that caused the cutting of his ears and nose as a punishment. As an act of revenge, the trading Ternatans murdered many people in Dawis. Thus, the Dawis residents fled to Dapitan. When Bohol was put under military control from the 16th up to the 17th centuries, Boholanos migrated to Cebu. Okay. Samareños migrated to Leyte because of the influenza and cholera in the reducciones in the 17th century. The people of Leyte migrated to Cebu when it became the central maritime trading post in the Visayas. Muslim traders migrated to Malaysia, Indonesia, Borneo, and Brunei. In fact, there are places called Bisaya in Brunei, Sabah Bisaya in Malaysia, and Bisaya, an indigenous group of people in Borneo. So here are now my insights. Western countries' competition and rush for maritime profits in the form of selling goods and human labor of dehumanized Visayan slaves had created conflicts and wars in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Likewise, religious impositions, Christianity or Islam, have pushed contending parties to the edge of enmity, animosity, war, and death. Subsistence economy, transformed to cash crop production and export economy, extracted not only labor, but also the natural resources in the Visayan region. Discontent arose from the exacting of tributes and repressive tax impositions from the Visayans, whose subsistence economy was enough to feed themselves dead. This created a wide gap between the ruling power and the ruled. Conflicts, famine, diseases such as influenza and cholera in the Spanish-mandated Reducción forced people to fight back or to leave their communities to seek peace and greener pastures. Colonization resulted to migration as a reaction to conflicts, deprivation, and thus disrupted the ecological balance in nature. This is according to Phelan. By colonization, the Visayan seas became the battleground between and among European powers that were distant yet had the far-reaching power over the Philippines. The Visayans were dragged into a war that was not of people's making. So Okay, in advance. The word Bisaya to mean slave, muchacha, alipin, katulong, housegirl or houseboy, and kasambahay has stuck to this day anywhere in the Philippines, more so in Mindanao, Malaysia, Borneo, and Brunei, where the Bisayans were traded and enslaved for hundreds of years. The word has to be reclaimed to mean what those people's virtues stood for. Culturally, though, the word oripod, again by Scott, to mean slave, was lost in the Visayan vocabulary. It became uropod, meaning a relative who has the chance to have an upward social mobility. And the chance was big at the time. One can be an aliping na mamahay today, but tomorrow he can become a Timawa or a Maharlika. Both in the Christian, Visayan, and Muslim Mindanao regions, this is quite different, take note, from the way slaves were treated in the European context. As for the Gohoy's tenacity to have a land of their own free from tributes and to have the chance to work on their farms in 1744, this remains to be the problem in the whole of Southeast Asia to the present day. Unknowingly, however, the Gohoy's Ilihan, Ili or Iring-Iring, I suppose Mount Iring-Iring in Antique got its name from Ilihan, retains the indigenous and ingenious engineering of rice terraces in the Visayas from when the Gohoy, perhaps the next generation of Visayans, have worked on until this 21st century. Uray Tupung's resilience amid adversities and the Babaylan audacity are likewise continued and have remained to be a legacy. Unknown to us, there are rice terraces in the Visayas. Young UP Visayas instructor Emmanuel Lerona spotted the antique rice terraces while he was doing the Google Earth satellite above Mount Igmatongtong in Lawaan, Antique recently. The word Babaylan in the Visayan vocabulary may have lost as a result of hundreds of years of colonization, but her legacy continues. She was and is the katuuran, meaning truth, hoped for the katadungan or righteousness, and katalwasan, freedom. She had the wisdom and warned the datos in 1521 that should they continue to be baptized, open quotation, this settlement shall be dispersed, this place shall be moved, shall fall, and uprooted, period, close quotation from De La Costa. The Babaylan power was weakened when she was hacked to death, quartered, beheaded, and fed to the crocodiles in the 16th and 17th centuries. The Bathala Aswang, capital A, guardian of the homes, became the fearful Aswang, small letter A, that the Spaniards compared with Europe's so-called witches. Babaylan then became the dreaded Aswang, small letter A, in eastern and western parts of the Visayan region. Now for my recommendations, we have to interrogate, this paper recommends the following: interrogate the language. We have a lot to learn from the words that were lost but continued to persist in the 21st century. For example, the word Santigaman used by the Visayan Mamaratbats, prayer leaders who inherited the Babaylan audacity, means in the name of the community or collective. And that issues as an opening of the prayer in making the sign of the cross. Study local histories of Visayas and Southeast Asia. Let us go back to ourselves. Let us go back to what our ancestors' cosmology, philosophies, and worldview before the onset of colonization. Let us shift to the narratives of those who were not heard of. As historians and educators, we must read the silences in the primary sources and include oral history in the absent narratives. On a high note, finally, the sea in the Visayas unites with the seas of the countries in Southeast Asia, and that is a quotation from Fryer. However diverse the political, economic, and cultural situations in the region. With more studies, more researches, and more talking on the table, the seemingly cohesion of Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines may be achieved. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Now I will be back to my old hat. I am now a moderator. So please join me, Professor Wijaya, to answer the queries. May I remind the audience that you may ask questions by pressing the raise hand button, or you may type your question in the chat box or the Q&A box. So may I see what the questions are? Okay, so this is a question from Jason or Kia Salibay to Ma'am Melencio. What are your sources or references for Tuba or Visayan wines? May I have the list for the self-readings? Okay, then he gave his email. Okay, answer to the first question, the source is Benito Legarda Jr. After the galleons. Another question, Camiguin Island is near the areas of those pre-Hispanic ports. Are there any documents pointing to proliferating market on the said area? Actually, I haven't encountered yet. The word Camiguin, I have not seen yet any document that will point to Camiguin as a pre-Hispanic port. Okay, now another question. I am interested in your topic. Will it be fine with you to share us the possible references or sources on the migration of the Bisaya? I am also curious whether there were migration that happened in Bohol and factors that attracts them to stay and their possible exchange of culture. Thank you. Okay, primarily the sources that where I got the migrations from Bohol is from Ferrer. She has an article about the reduction in Bohol in the 16th century. Okay, you may give me your email. I will give you the sources further. Now, a question. I will go further. Okay. Chat. Okay, Mr. Philemon has a question above. Again, but may I read first the question from Janet Atutubo. Why are the places like Cuban in Sorsogon, Siquijor, specific places in Rojas and in Panay are known as places of aswang? Actually, Ms. Atutubo, those places actually were, according to the documents, have had plenty of babaylands during the 16th and 17th centuries. And those so-called aswangs were relegated, the babaylands actually were relegated to that position to scare actually the people and remove the power of the babaylands, because the babaylands were actually leaders. They were the counselors of the Datu, to whom the Datu follows the advice of the babaylan. Okay. Are there any more questions? We still have 9 minutes. Okay. Okay, from the audience, anyone who would like to, okay, this is a question from, for Prof. Daya, from Dr. Santiago. How are the local Indonesian sources mentioned in your lecture different from your European sources?
Can you come again?
So I will repeat the question, Professor Daya. How are the local Indonesian sources mentioned in your lecture different from European sources?
Thank you so much for the question from Professor Santiago, if I have not mistaken. As I understand, the local sources, especially from the Moluccan area, they try to narrate that they resisted to the European colonial master. So, in aside, European sources try to narrate the European presence, and they blame the locals if they unsuccessful control the areas. And on the contrary, the local sources try to narrate confidently. So for example, like Hikayat Tanah itu, they try to narrate why the Hitu resisted to the Portuguese, as well as they also rebelled to the Dutch. So they didn't tell a lot about the trade, but they try to narrate, they try to explain why they resist. And the first part of the hikayat or the chronicle, especially they covered the genealogies of the kingdom itself, where they come from. For example, like Chronicle of Bajan and Chronicle of Ternate, they told what the Moluccas coming from and what referring to. So for example, Moluccas consisting of 5 islands that produce the spices, comprising of Tidore, Ternate, Makian, Bajan, and Moti. However, they try to differentiate between the Moluccas and Halmahera in the eastern part of Moluccas. So if the local sources could be traced, I think it can complement each other. We can have the full narrative of the European Eurasian encounter in my case study in the Moluccas. So it's all from me. Thank you, Professor Gloria.
Thank you for the answer, Professor Daya. Again, here is another question addressed to you. What is the difference between Moluccas and Malacca? Some participants may be confused with the two places with almost the same sound.
Can you hear me?
So again, the question is, what is the difference between Moluccas and Malacca?
Right now, at present, Malacca is situated in Malaysia and Moluccas is situated in Eastern Indonesia. I try to link it because as I understand Abu Gerke in 1511, he realized that Malacca didn't produce spices, and he tried to find where spices coming from. And the Moluccans, the Malay merchant, especially like Surya Dewa, the Keling merchant, and Pate Yusuf, Javanese merchant based in Malacca, they traded regularly to the Moluccas. So the Portuguese tried to persuade the native Nakoda Ismail to pilot them to go to the Moluccas. So in 1511, Abru, Serrao, and Simão Afonso, they were directed by Nakoda Ismail sailing through the Java Sea. Abru reached Banda, and Serrao continue to sail to the Moluccas. So both places are different, but I try to relate in title of trade networks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Now there are two questions addressed to you again, Professor Vijaya. Okay, the first question. Did the presence of Portuguese in Spice Islands affect the supply of spices, especially when military confrontations between them and the natives occur, and when the Portuguese took control of it? Did you get it? Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah, thank you.
Did the presence of Portuguese in Spice Islands affect the supply of spices, especially when military confrontations between them and the natives occur? So the first question. And second question, and when the Portuguese took control of the spices?
So I try to address to the second question first. As I understand, the Portuguese try to control the Moluccas when they erected the trading post in 1513, as how got like a treaty with Sultan Bayan in Ternate. So after that, the regular cloth ship they send regularly to the Moluccas. So between 1513 and 1575, they had a regular cloth ship between Goa in India, sail via Malacca, Brunei, and Ternate, Banda, Java, and back to Malacca and India. And the first question, as I understand, the Portuguese and the local dispute, the Portuguese try to monopolize the cloth and the nutmeg trade. But some people they thought that the price given by the Portuguese was really lower compared to other Portuguese rival or competitor. For example, Japanese, Gujarati, and Malay merchant, they could pay the better price rather than the Portuguese proposal. So they try to smuggle and sell to other merchants. And if it is affected right now, I think right now at present in Ternate and in Tidore, they have a lot of the clove like garden. But in Ambon Island, I didn't find any clove garden. But because of the COVID outbreak, that I could not go to the Ternate and Tidore, but I can go to Ambon and in the northern Ambon, in the Laihitu Peninsula. I think that in the Hoamoal, in the west of Serap, they have the clove garden. So the clove itself, they grow wildly, and I think clove nutmegs are the endemic plant of the Moluccas and the Banda Islands. So I don't think that all European wars with locals affect too much to the clove plant.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Wijaya. For lack of time, sorry, we would not be able to answer the two more questions. Rest assured, we will answer it in the chat box. Now, may I turn over the synthesis of Day 2 session to Philippine Normal University professor and PHA board member, Dr. Wensley Reyes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I clear?
Yes, good afternoon.
Hi. Thank you very much, Ma'am Glo. Congratulations to all. So good day. Our gratitude to all our speakers and panelists for today's sessions. What a fruitful day for the discipline of history, as well as to all our historical societies. I am Wensley Reyes, and I will be providing the synthesis for today's sessions. Day 2's morning session of Professor Xiao Chua, Mr. Ian Christian Alfonso, and Dr. Jose Eleazar Bersales discussed the underlying ideas that move the current celebration of the Philippine Quincentennial. They also discussed the misconceptions or common misconceptions concerning the celebrations related to 1521. It was followed with a keynote discussion of Dr. Victor Torres on the Mujeres panel investigation into the 1521 Easter Sunday Mass controversy. He highlighted the challenges and opportunities of accessibility, technology, and new discoveries of historical knowledge. He also highlighted the advantages and disadvantages of the library at your desk. The keynote discussion of Ma'am Feliz Prudente Santa Maria provided us with a different perspective of the circumnavigation, with the food being the central focus of the study. According to her, food is a major concern for all expeditions, while hunger is an enemy of all voyagers. She also mentioned the importance of Pigafetta's narrative as introduction into Southeast Asian foundation of Philippine cuisine before the Spanish colonization. The afternoon sessions are just as engaging as this morning's sharing. The discussion of Dr. Christopher Leslie provided us with historical background on the science of sea voyages in Southeast Asia, looking into its environment and society. He examined travel narratives about Southeast Asia in the 17th and 18th centuries, highlighting the reception of new scientific beliefs. Travel narratives served as the intersection of natural history and literature. Also, the notion of racism or the racist tendencies of travel narratives were discussed. He shared that the idea of race being developmental and contextual, especially with narratives having race-based ideas. The presentation of Ms. Dita Reista Nurfaizah and Andri Nugroho concerning the maritime trading network in the 15th century highlights that North Java was visited by traders, and the North Coastal and inside capital city could be considered as the oldest heritage in Java. Interactions between local residents and traders open cultural acculturation, including the spread of Islam. The paper of Jasper Christian Gambito explained Luzon's pre-Hispanic maritime trading, covering the 9th century up to 1521. He mentioned Luzon as a geographic unit, which is central to various trading networks, as evidenced by artifacts unearthed. Luzon's trading centers are located in Northwest Luzon, particularly Ilocos, Central Luzon, Luzon's Pampanga, Manila, as well as the Southern Luzon, which includes Laguna, Batangas, and Bicol. Jeffrey James Ligaro's discussion on the lantak as fire piston technology provided us with the information concerning the topic. He hypothesized that this technology was developed independently from European influence and is part of what we call ethnotechnology. He claimed that the richness of vocabularies and materials used to make and describe this technology may add to the evidence that lantak is native and indigenous. Meanwhile, Daya Negri Wijaya's paper provided us with information to understand the economic growth of the Malacca-Moluccas trade during the Portuguese period. He mentioned that the main economic life of Malacca are related to its trading duties as well as to it being part of the trading network. He utilized a Eurasian perspective in narrating the seaport networks under the Malacca-Moluccas route, as well as the clove trade during the period or the Portuguese period in Indonesia. Lastly, he stated that the maintenance of Portuguese monopoly was determined by political and logistical change. Gloria Melencio's paper discussed the engagement of the Visayan group of islands as trading centers including Cebu, Leyte, Samar, Panay, Negros, Bohol within the context of Southeast Asia during the 16th up to 18th century. She shared elements that affected the dynamics that made this area busy. Aside from trading, piracy and slavery were present that triggered the migration and movement of people. She proposed to interrogate the language and the study of local histories of Visayas and the Southeast Asia in relation to Southeast Asia. So generally, the discussions today highlighted the following. First, the maritime culture of Southeast Asia being the common thread connecting societies and histories, where trading is an important aspect of this culture. However, power and influence are moving forces, as well as both for colonizers and for the native people of Southeast Asia. Second, the discipline of history is alive and growing. Our understanding of our collective past rely in the recent researches coupled with present-day interpretation. And lastly, history research and history teaching are the two sides of the same coin, always together and integrated. We grow in the discipline of history because as a community, we engage and share our understanding of the past. Truly, with the papers presented, we have achieved in discussing the theme of our conference, Arrivals, Conflict, and Transformation in Maritime Southeast Asia, circa 1400 to 1800. So at this note, we end our productive session for today. To all our speakers, partners, and participants, our gratitude for sharing your time and your intelligence in expanding our current historical knowledge and understanding of Southeast Asia. Again, maraming salamat. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much, especially to all our partners. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Manila time. Take care and hati-hati.